Hey guys, Mrs. Narubin here, just going through our next set of notes with you. Um, this is set to be our assignment for Thursday, April, I think, 2nd. Yep, April 2nd. Hopefully everybody's still doing okay out there, and hopefully, doing some of the schoolwork kind of brings you a little bit back to normalcy. So we're getting really close actually to being done with talking about ecosystems. Next, we'll talk about human impact. And I'm really interested to see how this can kind of go in the next few weeks, especially with some of the conversations going on out there about, how humans have essentially totally changed their ways of life right now with all of the coronavirus stuff. And is it actually having any sort of change? So when we get into talking about ecosystem changes, remember, ecosystems are any area where we have living and non-living things that are existing together and working together. It can be as small of an ecosystem as like a fish tank in your room, or it could be as big as the Everglades or a national park or anything like that. Ecosystems exist on a ton of different scales. Something that you make a little terrarium, or if you go to a city park down the street or something like that. The pond part, probably plus the forest part, two different ecosystems because they have different living and non-living factors in there that work together. So the question is, how do ecosystems change? Three basic things: succession, seasonal changes, which you might wonder what those are because in Florida we don't really experience all that much of seasonal change, maybe visibly, but temperature wise and rain wise we do. And then climate change. Okay, so what our essential question is what changes occur to an ecosystem and what are the costs and benefits, right? A lot of people think when ecosystems change, it's just all negative. Something bad is happening, but really sometimes it can have a lot of benefit and not just cost. Okay, so what we've got here is just some different types of ecosystems. And I guess I could put this on, full screen for you. Types of ecosystems and examples. You probably have heard them called biomes before too, looking at different types of ecosystems like grasslands, forests, different types of forests, right? The forests that are here in Florida versus the forests that exist out in Washington State. Or California, we have different species of trees that live in our forests, and then different desert areas. Don't forget there's terrestrial or land ecosystems, but there's also aquatic, right? We see and are very familiar with the aquatic ecosystems around here, but just even within the state of Florida or even within the county, even we can see a ton of different aquatic ecosystems, from the beach to a little lake to maybe you are close enough to one of the rivers that go through. And then some examples of artificial or man-made. Now that society has become so much more complex and modern, okay, we start looking into what some of these artificial or more man-made ecosystems could be, like zoos. And let's be honest, who's watched Tiger King around here, right, with all of our free time? Different crop fields, which we now take inside, right? Different hydroponic systems, greenhouses, and things like that. Different aquariums, and then things that people put into place too, like dams. Sometimes people even go and make artificial reefs. They dump things out in the ocean that create reefs for different habitats to be set up in. All right, so going into succession first, ecological succession. You guys have probably heard of a successor before, talking about government and who replaces who in the lines of power. So succession is just changing over time. Ecosystems do that after a variety of times, and different things happen along with that. After there's some sort of disturbance, we see ecological succession. We normally see species move in, populations change, some species even die out. One of the most hard things that we saw this past year was when Australia experienced all the wildfires and we saw all the koalas that were being saved by people or, those that were not surviving. We saw the kangaroos, and it was just really hard to see. And so you saw that the species, potentially were facing some major losses in size because of the wildfires. Same thing with a lot of the wildlife that lived out in California. Disturbances influence species diversity and composition. So, how many individuals are going to be left living in an area when something like a forest fire happens? Also, we've talked about if there was something that happened when, only a few were killed, but they all possess the same traits. So it changes our gene pool, for the better, for the worse, whatever the case may be. We can see some change in diversity. They can become more diverse, less diverse, but typically we'll see them become a little less diverse. A disturbance changes a community by removing organisms or changing different availability of resources like fire, drought, flood, storm, or human activity. When we talk about primary succession, this happens when there's never really been a complex ecosystem before. It says that plants and animals invade where soil has not yet formed. If you guys have seen, well, I guess no. I was going to say, if you guys have been watching Moana, we've been watching Moana like crazy over here. When they go and reestablish all the greenery from Te Fiti coming and getting the heart back. But that's more, I guess, secondary succession because it was volcanic and everything. So never mind. That's not true. But what I was thinking is that when all the plants are reintroduced and they grow from what has no soil, that's an example of succession. So if you look, we see kind of like some soil where there's not much going on. Maybe it's rock and things like that. We see these annual plants, and then we see over time they kind of develop into much more mature types of forestry. So, for example, you can have colonization of a volcanic island or a glacier where there was no soil, but there was rock or ice or something. And at some point, some plants are able to inhabit it, kind of loosen up whatever that medium is and kind of create it and transition it to soil. When we see that first organism, that first plant show up, we call it a pioneer species. And it's the first organism that moves into a barren area, and it breaks down the rock to soil and then allows for other plants to move in. Secondary succession is what we're probably most used to seeing, because especially since it's talked so much about in the news. We have an existing community that's cleared by some sort of disturbance that leaves the soil there, which leaves nutrients and things like that, but still leaves the species totally not intact anymore. So, for example, there's a forest fire shown over here. And what you see is it says after 1 year, this is the same general area, but it shows how quick the community can recover and how it shows maybe some new species that weren't there in the past. But we'll start to see that the ground cover plants will kind of reintroduce first, and then we'll see regrowth with our larger plants. You guys have seen The Lion King, and I hope we get back to school because I always show it at the end of the year. This is a great example of secondary succession. If you remember the premise of the story, the hyenas in Scar take over what they call the Pride Lands. It used to look like this and was very diverse, lots of species, lots of different organisms. It was green. When they came in and took over and utilized all their resources and didn't kind of keep it in balance, they started seeing a lot of drought, and all the animals went away and the water source was all dried up. So it looked very barren and was very, very dry. Lightning struck during the epic fight scene and started a fire, which essentially got rid of everything else that was there. And then in the end, when Simba takes back over the Pride Lands and is going to be the king again, we see it rain, and it shows the regrowth of the Pride Lands. So this iconic movie, Disney was teaching you things that you didn't even know you knew. And as I mentioned, sometimes there's some cost, but also benefit. Disturbances can be natural cycles. And sometimes it helps kind of reset the balance in an ecosystem. It helps with recycling nutrients, by causing some plants to die and then decompose into the ground, putting nutrients back into the soil that was being taken out. Helps to increase biodiversity and change the different organisms that were there and introduce new traits. It can increase a habitat where maybe habitats weren't available, and it can kind of rejuvenate a community. Here's just an example of pond succession. We need to just remember that it doesn't only take place on terrestrial ecosystems, but it can also take place in aquatic ecosystems. So you can see here we have a young lake, and eventually it kind of starts filling in. All right, and we can see that it goes from being water to having some aquatic life kind of enter in, and then eventually it kind of fills and converts to forest. Debris and different things like that help with it kind of transitioning over. All right, so going on to the next way in which ecosystems can change, different seasonal changes. And as I mentioned, in Florida, we're not really all that used to seeing anything look extremely different. We don't see snow or anything like that as compared to other areas like the Midwest and out west and everything like that. But seasonal changes can be very obvious in some regions where, you know, in the summer and springtime, everything is new and green and flowering. Whereas the fall, we start to see it kind of go just to green and yellows and transition into fall colored leaves, and then they all fall off. And then we see them look pretty barren and covered in snow. What we're probably most used to seeing around here, yes, we see that the leaves shed, right? Pollen season, and then all the leaves start to fall off as well. You'll start to notice that some plants flower at different parts of the year, like plumerias and things like that, and they look dead half the year. Whereas the other half of the year, then they come back and they're blooming like crazy. Some of the other things we'll see is the different water levels at the beach. And, you know, if there's a lot of water, you'll start to see the grass, right? Sometimes the grass looks really, really green. Sometimes it's brown and pretty sandy, depending on how much rain there's been. So kind of our biggest seasonal factor is rain, precipitation, and just the general heat. The other thing that we're probably most familiar with is we watch how our animals migrate during different seasons. When the water temperature drops out in the Gulf, a lot of our manatees move into springs and other areas that have warm water feeders so that they can stay warm. So although we might not see a lot of physical changes in our landscape, we see a lot of different migratory patterns with our animals that help indicate seasonal changes. And then climate change. This is something that we'll get into more depth with coming in the next week or two. But climate change, as we've talked about, is just the general rising of Earth's temperature over time that they say changes a lot of other things, like increases the strength and number of hurricanes that we experience, right? Or increases the number of forest fires that are going on. And I think you guys could probably agree with me that this past year just seemed crazy, right? We had the year of Irma coming through and other hurricanes in years past that went through the Bahamas and went through the Keys and everything like that. It was just kind of seemed really crazy the last few years. And then this past year, we had a ton of forest fires. You know, whether it's media or whether it's just all kicking back up, you know, I'd have to look for sure, but it definitely seems like it's ramping up. And I included this picture right here. And if you guys can't notice, this is supposed to represent the coronavirus, but something that they're saying, and I can't wait till they come out with some actual data that we can analyze, is because so many people are no longer commuting to work and a lot of factories are closing down because they cannot be that close to one another. And we see a lot of like economic systems temporarily stopping. There are people saying that we're seeing some changes in our atmosphere, right? We're seeing less carbon dioxide production, which we know ramps up our climate change cycle. So a lot of people have kind of put out there, is all this happening as Mother Nature's kind of like hit the pause button, let us kind of regain and take a look at what we're doing and how it's really affecting the earth. So I don't know, that's just some kind of food for thought. I'm a numbers person, so I like to look and see what they have to say about it. All right, so that's that for our little slideshow. Hopefully you guys are looking at these videos on my little YouTube channel so that you can have full access. other than that, answer the forums question today that I'll link in the little discussion section. And have a good day, guys. I'll see you next time. Oh, and I guess I should tell you, tomorrow's assignment, Friday, is to watch a documentary on wildfires and climate change and do a response. So that'll be posted in the discussion as well. All right. Talk to you guys later. Bye.